I'm not talking. Did you try and turn up your volume? Did I get you? Okay, so being online gets me a little crazy. Actually, that's not true. What you see is what you get. So even if you knew me in class, it's about what it would be. It's about the same. So we are going to be looking today at Haruki Murakami's short story, The Seventh Man. I'm going to try and do some analysis for you, help explain the story a little bit to you. I'm going to try and bounce back and forth between this PowerPoint and maybe the text. I don't know. We'll see. So I got my copy here. You have your copy of the text on the computer. You can pause this video as much as you want or need to bounce back and forth. So I'm going to try and talk about some things. So very broadly, this story is about a boy who goes out to the beach in the middle of a typhoon, and his best friend gets swept up in a tidal wave because of the storm. And his best friend dies, and the boy has to grow up, and he grows up into a grown adult man, and he has to deal with this event that happened to him. That's the basic story. But this story is filled with all kinds of other mystery and things going on. So let's just go ahead and dive in. This is one of the longer stories that we've read so far, so this will probably be a two-part video. All right. So things to keep an eye on. Conflict. We talked about conflict the other day, the different types of conflict. So I already told you that it's about a typhoon. So what's the kind of conflict that you would expect in a story? Yes, character versus nature. Very good. Okay. The basic plot. What is happening? Lots of things are going on in this story. Try and make sure you are following the basic plot. Okay. And the characters. Who are the characters? And what do you think about them? How do you feel about them? Those are just ways that we read stories. Try and reflect on them. Think about all the other stories we've read so far this school year. Reflect on how we've talked about the characters and what it means. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive in. So, the basic setting, all right, it probably begins sometime in the 60s, maybe later in the 70s. It's hard to tell exactly because there's not a lot of really clear dates given, but not all that important, but it probably begins around the 60s, okay? And the story starts with a group of people sitting around telling stories. And it's very, very mysterious because we don't get a lot of details. We simply are told the seventh man is talking. We get this idea of a small group sitting there listening. But we don't know who these people in the small group are. We don't know why they are there. We don't know why he is called the seventh man. We can make guesses. Maybe he is the seventh man to tell a story, which makes me wonder what happened to the first 6 stories, right? But those things aren't in this. They're just not written, which is just kind of adds to the mystery and excitement of the story, I think. I think it just makes it so there's more questions than answers in that regard. Okay? All right, so it begins, and it's a third-person narrator saying, he said, he did, he thought. Okay? And then the story, most of it in the middle, flashes back to the first-person narrator, and it starts when he was a child, and it goes until he's an adult, and that's the middle part. And then the end of the story, the last little page or so, it shifts back to the third-person narrator. So you get this bookend. The beginning and the end are present day, 1960s, but kind of modern day. Okay? And the whole middle part is this flashback of his childhood and adulthood that he is telling us about. So try and keep that in mind as you read. All right. So as I've already said, who is the seventh man? What the heck does that mean? I don't know, but I find it very mysterious. Maybe even a little bit of dread because there's like this idea of the numbers, like what happened to the first 6 numbers, what comes after the 7th. And when you have questions like that, it makes you feel a little uncomfortable because we want answers to questions. When there's no answers, it makes us feel a little weird. Okay, already talked about the small group. So why are they together? Why are they there? Why are they telling stories? We don't know. It's mysterious. Here's the thing. It actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the story. But as a reader, I just enjoy it. And that's okay. You can enjoy parts of stories. We don't all have to be like, I am a literature reader, professor extraordinaire. We don't have to act like that all the time. Sometimes we can just read stories and go, I liked it. It was good. I didn't understand it, but I liked it. And that's kind of what I feel here. Like, I'm not quite sure of everything that's going on, but I'm okay with that. All right. So, as I've said, the narrator is the person who tells the story. And actually, we have two narrators in the story. One is the third person outside voice. And the narrator in that case uses words like he, she, they, them. All right. And the third person narrator is telling us what the seventh man says and what the seventh man is like. For example, we get in the story, said the seventh man, and the seventh man appeared to be in his mid-50s. So we got to look for those word cues that help us understand who is talking and what's going on. Okay, on page 2, the story shifts. The seventh man, and we never learn his proper name, so we just are going to call him the seventh man. The seventh man tells us his story. And in fact, we got the little star, star, star dividing the page when he takes over. And the first word is I. And so you as critical reader, you have to be able to see that shift and notice, wait, it went from he to I. Okay, I'm tracking now. I know that somebody else was talking, and now the seventh man is talking. So pay attention to those details. All right. He says, I, me, my, etc. The first word there is I grew up. And then, as I mentioned already, the story ends in the third person taking back over. And we will talk more when we get to the end. All right. Make sure you keep the narrator straight, because otherwise you might be rather confused. All right. So, there's no way for me to tell, of course, what it will be for each of you. This is what the narrator says on page 2. This strange sentence, and it's strange and confusing because so much is left unsaid. The seventh man says he doesn't know what it will be. And it has to have what we call an antecedent. It is the pronoun, but it doesn't refer back to anything. There's no antecedent. There's no words to connect it to. So look at this example here. Many types of food can make you sick, but I don't know what it will be for you. It refers to the food. So without there being any reference, okay, it's very confusing. There's no way for me to tell, of course, what it will be for each of you. But then he goes on to tell what it was for him. Here's what I think. I think it kind of also still doesn't really matter. But I love it. Because then I wonder, okay, maybe 6 other people told stories about things that happened to them. And they all said, well, I don't know how it'll affect you, but this is how it affected me. Well, I don't know what it will do for you, but this is what it did to me. And each person tells this story of how they went through a major life change. And I think what the narrator here is saying is that it doesn't really matter what it is. Listen to my story and hear how it changed me. Which is kind of cool. All right. I like the mystery of it. All right. We get the character named K. Ever since I could remember, my best friend was called K. K. Just K, period. That's it. K. Again, part of the mystery. No real explanation. Why don't we get his full name? I don't know. Maybe the seventh man feels bad about what happens to Kay, and so he doesn't want to actually share his real name. Maybe that's why we don't ever get the seventh man's name either. Think about the Scarlet Ibis and how that narrator never told us his name either. So maybe there's some of that shame going on in the story, embarrassment over what happens. But either way, still doesn't matter because we have the seventh man as the main character and K as the best friend. All right. So what do we know about K? We are told here on page 2, he was a sweet and pure-hearted boy. That's direct characterization. Tells us exactly the kind of person that K is. And K was a sweet, pure-hearted boy. All right. So keep that in mind. K was a sweet, pure-hearted boy. Here we are in SoCal. We have to worry about earthquakes every once in a while, but I have never had to deal with a typhoon. Heard of hurricanes. I've seen and heard of them on the news. I know some of my students who have come from the Philippines before. They've had to deal with typhoons quite a bit. Anyway, typhoon is a natural weather kind of experience, a major event. So does the typhoon cause trouble for the people in the story? Yes. Yes, it does cause trouble for the people in the story. Would you say that the typhoon is creating conflict? Yes, the typhoon creates conflict. So we have character versus nature. So page 3, it says, one year in September, a huge typhoon hit our area. The radio said it was going to be the worst in 10 years. The schools were closed and all the shops in town were lowered their shutters in preparation for the storm. And starting early in the morning, my father and brother went around the house, nailing shut all the storm doors. So they boarded up, and the whole community would look like this. All right. So they are boarded up during the storm as the storm beats up, the rain, the wind, and everything. All right. Page 4, we get yet another obscure kind of comment. We get that let's see here. The seventh man tells us that the storm came ashore at S province. S province. Province would be an area, like we're in Orange County, so you might think of it as like S County. It's just an area of the country. If you know anything about Japan, you know it is an island, not a particularly big island, and so theirs is broken up into province. Their geography is broken into provinces. So, S province does not seem to exist. Again, not an expert. If I am wrong, you can please correct me. But anyway, it's just S province. I think that adds the idea of it being it's a fictional story. So much of it feels real. The seventh man feels real. His experiences all seem like they could really occur. So maybe the author was like, well, we'll just make it a fake place, just so people don't get too confused, too much thinking that it's a real place. All right. So just be aware, S province, not a real place, I don't think. All right, but that's also where these characters lived. So the seventh man, K, their families, they live in S province where this typhoon came ashore. Now, Eye of the Storm, I've never seen. Let's try and see if we can watch this short little video here showing what it would be like in the eye of the storm. Now, as you can see, you've got massive clouds here, but a perfectly blue sky. Everything I've read says that when you are in a crazy storm like this, when the eye of the hurricane or the eye of the typhoon comes overhead, you can look straight up and there's nothing blowing. It's just calm and quiet and beautiful. So this is kind of an interesting little video. Let's see if we can watch this. And we know that because of hurricane hunters who fly into the storm to collect critical data and get pictures like this one, this is what is able to keep a lot of people safe. And you can imagine this is quite scary to be in the middle of, but just another day at the office for my next guest, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross, who's with us. So you flew into the core of this hurricane. This video is incredible. We've seen from one of your teammates a picture that has gone viral. Skip ahead just a little bit.
Times 165 times. Tell us about being in the middle of Dorian and how this compares. Hey, Brian, thanks for having us on. First off, glad to be here. Yeah, Dorian is a very powerful Category 4 storm. Like mentioned, it's sort of the same. Like, every storm has its own unique personality, so you never really know what to expect. But Dorian, she's very powerful, and she's been holding this very tight eye wall and a really well-defined stadium effect for the last couple of days. So the crews that are flying in and out of Dorian daily now. We're on at this. The squadron's on its 13th mission right now. We started in Curacao. We pulled back to Homestead, Florida, and now everything is currently flown out at Keesler Air Force Base right here in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's a very fun job. It's very thrilling to do this. It's actually incredible to see what Mother Nature has created from the inside and what I call the belly of the beast, to be up and close and personal with a hurricane that's this powerful. It's a good ride going in. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's bumpy. You just never know.
It really is beautiful as you see it, but which a lot of people would looking at this well-formed.
I think we get the idea there. Okay, but it's pretty amazing that storm would be like that. All right. So on page 4, when it talks about we're in the eye of the storm, things really get quieted. In our narrator, the seventh man, he as a child, he's interested, as most of us would be, and he asks his dad, "Can I go look around?" So he walks out because it's calm, it's quiet, it's safe for the time being. And he's walking down to the beach, and his friend Kay sees him, and Kay follows along. And so Kay and the seventh man, as boys, are heading down to the beach in the middle of the storm. They are in the eye. They're in the calm center. Right? All right. A couple of things. We have this word personification. Personification is when we give human person qualities, human person descriptions to non-person things. So look at the storm. It says that the storm has the eye of the storm, right? Eye of the storm, fixing its cold stare on us below. Storms can't stare, and yet that's how it's described. It's described as having a big hand swinging down and flattening everything in its path. Storms don't have hands. But we talked about how the nature is the conflict here, and now nature is being described as a person, as an antagonist. In a few pages, we're going to get to the tidal wave. And the wave is described as having a long, smooth tongue. And the wave is described as having a wild cry. And the waves are described as being alive. Well, waves don't have tongues. They can't cry out. And they certainly are not alive. But we're giving these qualities to the storm and to the waves. I think it's a very interesting way, and it helps make these seem like bad guys, right? These are the enemy. These are the forces that are causing trouble. So I like how we see those descriptions. All right, so they're walking along, and they're looking at things, and they're just checking things out. They're looking around. Okay. So some of the vocabulary that we've looked at on page 5, hopefully words like breakwater and dike and flotsam are words that you now know, which are good words to know. All right. So the seventh man is standing there, and he starts noticing the wave pattern and how it seems very different. I do love this sentence. The waves that had approached me were as unthreatening as waves can be, a gentle washing of the sandy beach. But something ominous about them sent a chill down my spine. These waves are gentle, but we get unthreatening and ominous. Unthreatening and ominous. These are what we call contradictions. You can't have these two things at the same time. If it's unthreatening, it cannot be ominous. And if it's ominous, it cannot be unthreatening. And yet, that's how it's described. So we as the reader, we have to really try and get ourselves into this position of like, the waves were calm, but everything around is so weird in this strange experience that the seventh man still feels a little bit of fear. He still feels a little uneasy. All right. I like that. Um, One of the other things we've talked about in terms of conflict is the idea of a character versus God or the supernatural or fate. So I'm going to make the argument that there's a little bit of supernatural in this story as part of the conflict. I think names like K, S Province, Seventh Man, Strange Group of People, that all that mystery that we talked about at the beginning of this video, I think it adds to this supernatural feeling. Page 7, we get the description of the wave as having a special kind of sound. Well, what's special about a wave? I mean, we're SoCal, we go to the beach, we hear waves. Waves sound like waves. I imagine they sound the same everywhere. And I imagine the seventh man has heard thousands and thousands of waves. So why is it all of a sudden this different, strange sound? The wave hovers on page 8. It's like it stops. Well, we know that waves cannot stop. They cannot simply hover. Okay? And the seventh man himself even says that this story might be impossible to believe. So I would make the argument that we see character versus the supernatural at least a little bit here in the story. In terms of the seventh man, he cannot explain what happened. That takes me back to page 6 where it says, I was sure I had yelled loud enough. I'm getting out of here, I'd yelled to Kay. And yet he wonders, or possibly I had not yelled as loudly as I thought. This supernatural element, I think, the narrator, he can't quite tell what is truth and what is made up in his own head. He thinks he yelled, but he second guesses himself and says, I don't know, like, after all this time, maybe I didn't yell very loud. I thought I yelled, but I don't know. Anyway, and that yelling here, I think, is going to be part of the character's development, the seventh man's character development as we continue on. All right. I think I'm going to pause here for the end of part 1, and then we'll do it again for part 2 to continue, because I think we're getting a little bit long here. All right. See you around.